Thank you, Kay. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you here today. I'm Natalie Shoup. I'm a grant specialist for the Safe Online initiative of the In Violence Partnership, which is a partnership of over 700 organizations. I'm coordinating our partnership with the Tech Coalition and our joint research fund that we launched for the first time last year that many of you may be familiar with. Safe Online is one initiative of the In Violence Partnership. Our initiative invests in frontline organizations combating online CSEA globally. And other than the investments in organizations working on the ground, we also connect grantees, partners, experts in our networks to exchange knowledge and practice in this space. So Huddersfield University and Ni3 belongs to the Tech Solutions cohort, which was awarded in 2020. And they're now part of our Safe Online community that by the end of this quarter will include investments of 68 million in grants awarded to 80 organizations with impact in more than 75 countries. We'd love to share more about our work with anyone who's always interested. We are the lead of the research arm of Project Protect with the Tech Coalition, so have really enjoyed working closely with the research working group and look forward to continuing to work and meet more of you. I'll pass it back to Kay.
Thank you so much for that, Natalie. And with that, I will now kick it over to Laura Moody from Discord, who's a member of our research working group, and will introduce our presenters today.
Thanks so much, Kay. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura. I work with Discord, and I am super pleased to present to you today our panelists from Ni3. They are Vicky Hart, who is the Center Manager for the Ni3 Center and is a member of the Center Management Group. She's worked with higher education and supports large-scale international projects, including a 6-country study on the impact of parental imprisonment on children and Ni3's EU-funded project in Barbados and Grenada, amongst others. Vicky's also responsible for managing a number of systems and processes to support the work of the Ni3 Center, as well as managing academic staff and financial personnel activities and relationship management with funders and partners. We also have Professor Adele Jones, founder and former center director. Adele Jones was professor of social work at the University of Huddersfield, a position she held until her retirement in 2021. She had previously worked at the University of the West Indies. Adele is a specialist in international children's rights and the prevention of violence against women and children. She's the author of numerous publications on topics as varied as child abuse, adoption, residential care, migration, child refugees, gender inequality, and HIV/AIDS, and has directed research in over 16 countries. We also have Dr. Nadia Wager. Dr. Nadia Wager, is it Wager or Wager? It's like it's Wager, sorry. Dr. Nadia Wager is a reader in forensic psychology at the University of Huddersfield. She was awarded a PhD in applied social psychology from Brunel in 2002 and has been lecturing in forensic psychology and victimology ever since. She has a long history of evaluating community interventions for victims of serious crimes, whilst working in partnership with those who are delivering the same services. This has included conducting research for the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse on the quantification of online facilitated child sexual abuse / exploitation. The evaluation, she also has taken part in the evaluation of an independent trauma advisor service for victims of modern day slavery, and a rapid evidence assessment on the outcomes for survivors of historic child sexual abuse, among many others. Also with us from Ni3 are Dr. Simon Parkinson, who is a reader, associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Huddersfield and is leading the Center for Cybersecurity. We also have Craig Gibb, games producer for the Ni3 Research Center based in Huddersfield. They are also here to answer questions, which you will be able to do in the chat throughout the presentation and at the end. And with that, I think we can hand it to our panelists.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Laura. I'm just going to give Nadia a minute to get our presentation up on the screen. Fantastic. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Vicky. I'm delighted to be here with you all today, representing the Ni3 Centre team here at Huddersfield. I know I speak for the whole team when I tell you that we're really excited to be here today. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to just let you know that I'm going to be starting the presentation just by telling you a little bit more about None3, past, present and future, and more about the work that we do before handing over to my colleague Adele, then my colleague Nadia, before concluding the presentation for you. But enough of that, let's begin. Why None3? None3 takes its name from the World Health Organization's shocking statistic that 1 in 3 women and girls will experience physical and/or sexual violence in their lifetime. Just think about that. We say the only acceptable statistic is none in 3. We are an international, cross-cultural, interdisciplinary centre for the global prevention of violence against women and children. We are notable for our innovative approach of developing evidence-based anti-violence video games as educational tools. We are comprised of social scientists, game developers, creative artists, and research managers from 10 universities around the world. What we do, our core business. We harness digital technology to tackle gender-based violence, working to prevent this through education and by targeting those most amenable to change, this being the young. We use a method with huge potential for reach, video games. We aim to engage young people as activists against gender-based violence and to disrupt negative thinking about gender. We build victim empathy and we empower victims by facilitating help seeking and providing the language, skills and strategy to get help. Our projects. Our project work at None3 is truly global. We have collaborated with partners to undertake research and to generate new knowledge on a wide range of gender-based violence related issues in a number of countries, as you can see here. In Barbados, Grenada and St. Lucia, we've looked at domestic violence. In India, gender bias and violence against women. In Jamaica, child sexual abuse in the family. In Uganda, sexual coercion and child marriage. And in Brazil, online sexual abuse. Within the UK, our work has included dating violence among adolescents, and you're going to hear more about that particular piece of work shortly. We've also undertaken research on online facilitated child sexual abuse, which was conducted using a rapid evidence assessment. Also, we've looked at the impact of online child sexual abuse, and this took the form of a literature review. And finally, we've researched the traumatic impact that child sexual abuse has on offenders' families. We have a systems approach here at None3. You can see this here, and it illustrates how all aspects of our work is closely linked. So to explain, starting at the top, our research identifies the drivers and impacts of gender-based violence, which then goes on to inform the creation of our video games. We then implement and importantly evaluate the impact of these games, and we facilitate educational reform, not only through our games, but also through the development of supportive educational learning materials. And we ensure both stakeholder and public engagement with our work throughout the research process. And finally, we are committed to capacity building, the delivery of training, and we have produced a number of policy briefs. And in addition, we also have produced a raft of academic publications based on our research, which can all be accessed via our None3 web pages. Adele, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I want to talk first of all about the foundational research, the research on which Ni3 has been built. This was directed by myself. It was commissioned by UNICEF. It was carried out in 6 countries in the Eastern Caribbean and reported in 2009. And this research remains still the primary research from which UNICEF in the Eastern Caribbean region has developed its programming activities. There's going to be nothing surprising in these findings, but it's important still to revisit them. Child sexual abuse, extensive and unremitting. Its main forms, child sexual abuse in the family, non-family abuse, transactional sexual abuse, online and cell phone abuse, trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. Our findings found that non-abusing adults contribute through denial and failure to take appropriate action. Criminal justice and professional responses are largely inadequate, and both boys and girls can be victims. However, the abuse of boys is little acknowledged, and while most perpetrators are men, female perpetrated abuse is also little acknowledged in the region. Polyvictimization and the intergenerational transmission of child sexual abuse, or rather of values and behaviors that enable it, was a significant finding. What we did discover from this research, which has gone on to inform everything that we have subsequently done, is that child sexual abuse is not just about individual pathology. It's underpinned by complex social, cultural, and structural factors. And in line with our systems model, a systemic whole of society approach is needed to tackle it. I mentioned culture. Well, culture matters to the work of Ni3 in almost everything that we do. It also matters in research. And if I just highlight some findings from recent research that we've carried out, I can explain this further. We carried out studies, surveys of over 30,000 young people in Uganda, Jamaica, India, and the UK. The data on India and the UK are still being verified, but here are some of the findings on child sexual abuse in Uganda and Jamaica. Notwithstanding the very high prevalence rate of self-reported sexual abuse in families, and in Jamaica we see that in the family we're talking about over 15% of young people. In Uganda, almost a quarter of young people who participated in the study reported sexual abuse in the family. However, outside of the family, the figures rise exponentially. And why culture matters? It matters because although we must focus on the family, we must also focus on the wider cultural norms through which sexual abuse, coercion, and harassment are enabled. And I can further explain this, why culture matters in research, through some of our other findings. We conducted research in Grenada and Barbados, and we discovered, if you look at these slides here, you will see that when we divided the numbers into boys and girls, that actually boys reported higher levels of sexual violence than did girls. Now, this is a very surprising statistic, and it flies in the face of most international research, but it does not stand alone. A World Bank study in 2003 carried out of over 12,000 young people in the region also reported very high numbers of young boys reporting experience of sexual abuse. What we understand by this, however, is not necessarily that girls are not as experiencing abuse to the same levels or even greater levels than boys, but where shared cultural values promote male sexual harassment, male sexual entitlement, sexual harassment and abuse can become normalized. And when you look at other studies in the region, girls will often underreport child sexual abuse or fail even to recognize it. They often consider sexual harassment and coercion just to be a normal, inevitable part of growing up as a girl, which of course it's not. Another important finding from this research was, despite the large numbers of young people reporting sexual abuse, even larger numbers were reporting that emotional victimization was more prevalent. However, we know that emotional victimization, it occurs alongside all kinds of abuse, but it also stands alone. And cultural assumptions that children are not really harmed by name calling, by derogatory comments or bullying mean that little attention is given to the effects of emotional harms. And this is a finding that is emerging from our research in India and the UK. So how do we use this research to inform our games? Well, as Vicky said, we do also, as well as survey research, we do qualitative research looking at the drivers, the social and cultural drivers of gender-based violence. Our research as a whole has reported that for those young people who experience high or moderate levels of violence, they are significantly more likely to engage in violent and hostile behavior and to hold attitudes that suggest that violence is normal, and in some instances, even acceptable. In those instances, children are likely to have reduced empathic capacity, and reduced empathy is a major factor in the perpetration of violence. In all of our studies, girls have indicated significantly greater levels of empathy than boys. And these are the behaviors, attitudes, and attributes that we tackle through our pro-social games. Now, we have designed a very sophisticated, I only show some of the themes here, a very sophisticated game development framework, which allows us to systematically apply our research findings to game design through every stage of the process. As you can see here, I won't read them out, but you can see how important it is that we apply this systematically to ensure that we address all of these issues in a way that's appropriate. In terms of the gameplay itself, we have a very small in-house game development team led by Craig, and we have used both Unity as well as Unreal Engine as creation tools. Our games are story-led, based on role play. They are playable on PC, Windows 7 or above operating systems, and we don't build in any network dependencies to ensure that we can maximize access to the games. The games are designed to change attitudes that fuel gender-based violence, to inspire empathy, and to encourage healthy relationships. And as Vicky mentioned, we also produce curriculum materials to accompany the games. In terms of cultural authenticity, how do we ensure that? Well, hopefully these screenshots from our games in Uganda, Jamaica, and India will give you a glimpse as to how we do that. But we do this through our environments, through our characters, through the language that is used, the clothing, the food, the customs, the contexts. And we do this by constantly checking back with our co-producers, and those are the young people who are going to be benefiting or using our games, as well as local country experts. So I will now hand over to Nadia.
Thank you, Adele. Sorry, having difficulty unmuting myself. I really want to turn us now to thinking about online child sexual abuse and looking at some of the work that we've done that underpins the game development now with our game in Brazil. To start with, I want to talk about what is online child sexual abuse, and the work we did with the independent inquiry into estimating the extent of online child sex abuse started with us actually teasing apart what does this phenomenon actually look like. And what we discovered is actually online child sexual abuse actually manifests in 5 different ways. It might stem from image-related offences, which is what most people focus on, so the accessing and downloading, sharing and creating of images. But it can also be children's exposure to adult pornography online, online solicitation of children, the accidental sharing or intentional sharing of images of child sexual abuse that accompanies peer sexting, and also the way in which online facilities enable perpetrators of child sexual abuse to ensure the compliance of a victim that they have at the moment. In terms of some of our other findings then, in relation to the independent inquiry report, we found that online risks are growing and constantly changing, so new technology creates new opportunities for perpetrators. We also recognise that without the interventions of organisations such as CEOP and National Crime Agency and the Internet Watch Foundation, children's safety online would be significantly compromised. Images of child sexual abuse many often will arise from young people's own sexting and exploration of their own sexuality. And these images, once online, can be appropriated by other predatory adult perpetrators who could then actually carry on distributing these images. Importantly, what we found that actually up to 42% of online sex offenders tend to also engage in contact sexual abuse. But there's often a discussion around online sex offenders being very different to contact sex offenders, or that there's this notion that online offending leads into contact offending. What we're seeing from these self-report perpetration studies, where people have been able to report their activities anonymously, there's actually much more of a crossover between the online and the contact offending, and it's not necessarily that one leads to the other. These same studies also highlight that actually females aren't a very small minority. Actually, between 1/3 and 1/4 of those accessing images of child sexual abuse happen to be female. For the other work that we've done looking at the impact of child sexual abuse on children, we've looked specifically also about the impact of online offences. And what we found in the literature was there's this unfounded perception that online child sexual abuse was far less harmful to the direct victims than was contact offending. However, when you actually start to look into this, we found still high rates of suicide and self-harming amongst these children that are affected. Their mental health and behavioural problems manifest. Many develop alcohol and drug use as a way of coping with the abuse. And many reported low levels of self-worth and high levels of self-blame, and have ongoing trust and relationship problems well into adulthood. Now, when we think about victims of child sexual abuse, particularly when it's online, we'll often think of the primary victims, those children that appear in the images or those who are subjected to online solicitation. However, the work that we've been conducting in the UK with the Lucy Faithfull Foundation has extended to look at the other secondary victims of online sex offences, really particularly looking at the families of offenders who traditionally have been very, very overlooked. And what our study found, which was done both by survey and with interview data, we found that there's incredibly high levels of PTSD amongst this group of people. So that the trauma typically starts with the discovery of the offence, but often comes from the knock and the police knocking on the door to apprehend the offender. Families get torn apart. The stigma and the shame that the families experience mean that they experience what's known as disenfranchised grief and are unable to elicit social support for actually coping with this sense of loss. The impacts are very much exacerbated by the extent of the problem. We thought before COVID that it was about 850 arrests in England and Wales alone were happening each month. That now has exceeded over 1,000 a month. In about 1/3 of those arrests, children are present at the time of the police appearing. And unfortunately, this huge increase in the problem happening and the police's recognition of that means the police are having difficulty in processing the digital evidence. We see with all forms of sexual violence now that there's a huge digital trail, but we don't have the resources within our police force currently in order to actually process this quickly enough. The backlogs in the case processing therefore leave the families in this state of limbo, and it leaves potential victims unrecognised and hence unsupported. We need to think about why this online child sexual abuse then is so pernicious. In terms of the intensity, because the person doesn't have to necessarily be present, they're able to contact the victim over and over again, multiple times a day, often keeping the young people awake at night, because this disrupts their ability to problem solve and to make sensible decisions. And actually they can become much more compliant. The online aspect also allows for this invasiveness. So whereas normally children can escape somebody that's bullying them or abusing them when they're in a safe space, either in or out of the home, depending on where the offence is taking place, when it's happening online, there's no escape from this abuse. It happens constantly. With image-related offences, there's this sense of permanence, that once the images are out there online and on the internet, that they're there forever. Although this may not be true, that actually there is quite a high level of decay that happens in terms of the number of images circulating. What we don't know is when those images will resurface. And so there is this sense that they're out there forever, which prevents the victims from popping this experience behind them. They are stuck with it in ever present. There's also this sense of reach. How far have people seen these? How many people, how far away are they, and who are they likely to be? Normally, when you disclose about being a victim of abuse, you can choose the amount that you want to say and the level of detail you want to give. When something's been captured in terms of an image or a recorded text, it means that you have no control of that either. So it's there in all of its entirety. Because the perpetrator isn't necessarily present when the victim is victimised, it means that victims get engaged in a much higher level of self-blame, which really compromises their ability to recover and move on. Not only do victims engage in self-blame, but those to whom they disclose also perceive the victims to be much more blameworthy. There's this sense that children have been taught how to keep themselves safe online. And so then when they do fall prey to predators, unfortunately, they're held accountable themselves. In terms of our current projects, what we're doing in terms of online CSA, we've got 3 strands of work at the moment. The first is our Brazil project, which is funded by the End Violence Against Children Fund. And in this, we're developing our new game called Emilio. And the game's aim is to prevent youth perpetrated online child sexual abuse. We've already undertaken our foundational research, which has explored the nature and extent and the drivers and consequences of youth perpetrated online CSA in the context of sexting. We're not saying that sexting itself is bad, but actually abuse can arise from sexting behaviours. Additional work that we've just started in the UK now, which has been funded by the University of Huddersfield, involves this partnership with tech consultants and police forces. And we're attempting to develop a tool for automatically identifying online victims of child sexual abuse that have been appropriated from perpetrators' devices. Our aim is to reduce the processing time to help improve victim identification, swift intervention, and therefore reduce the traumatic effects of the investigation on the families and to enable victims to get support more rapidly. Also, our recently closing project being conducted in the UK as part of the GCF project is our UK game development. The game is called Danielle. So the game has been designed to tackle adolescent dating violence, but has included some level of online sexual abuse. And I'm going to try and show you a bit.
The character's boyfriend, James, uses his phone to harass Danielle, the player character, into sending him revealing photos of herself, and then tells his friends.
Can I just check that you're able to hear this at the moment? Yes, thank you.
About it, possibly even showing them the photos depending on player decisions. This then leads another character to sexually harass Danielle about the photos, something that he probably wouldn't be bold enough to do if they were stood in the same room together. It allowed us to show the trickle effect that some elements of gender-based violence can have on the victims, and how digital gender-based violence can be particularly pervasive. The explicit photos make a further impact later in the game as well, when they're shared on social media after the end of Danielle and James's relationship. This allowed us to show the impact of so-called revenge porn, or more appropriately known as non-consensual distribution of intimate images, something that many victims of gender-based violence face in real life. To do this, we created a pseudo-social media where the player could see the images being disseminated as both the victim and as a bystander, and as the latter they were able to report them in-game. Doing this allowed us to support the players by showing them what they can do if it happens to them or someone they know, both with the digital material that they want to report online and then how to act in person with someone who has been a victim. Overall, this better equips the player to understand how mobile phones can be used in gender-based violence, but how they can act should that happen.
Thank you, and I hope that gives you just a flavour of what the game would entail.
The character's boyfriend, James, uses his phone to harass Danielle, the player character, into sending him revealing.
It's not letting you move forward. There we go. We have recently also undertaken randomised controlled trials of the game in 7 schools across the UK, just to see whether the playing the game has an impact on young people's attitudes towards online sexual abuse and aspects such as victim empathy. We've taken data collection at 4 different points in time, prior to the playing the game, within a week after playing the game, so at the end of the gameplay, a week after gameplay, and at the end of 4 months after gameplay. In our randomised controlled trial, we've employed 2 groups of young people, one who have played the game and another group who have actually acted as our control group. So data has been collected from them at the same points in time, but in fact, they've just carried on with their normal curricular activities. So what we can see here from the findings is that while there's a similar level of acceptance of sexual abuse online at time 1, those young people who play the game have a dramatic decline in their level of acceptance of online sexual abuse by time 2. And actually, this continues to decline at time 3 and time 4. So there's actually like a prolonged effect of the gameplay. We only see a slight decline in the control group. And we suspect that that might be the impact either of completing the surveys for the outcome measures over time and getting to think about what is online sexual abuse, or it might also be the fact that young people who were assigned to the control group would have still been chatting with people in the playground and the classrooms with young people who had actually played the game. And because the game was so novel and inspirational, many people were very excited about playing the game, that they may have shared discussions about this. So with our Brazil project, this has been really interesting to do. As I'm not sure whether you're aware, but at the moment in Brazil, it's very hard to talk about desire for gender equality. There's a real drive to not think about issues around gender-based violence or to talk about that. So when we've been promoting the game and the research in Brazil, we've been having to talk about online safety in general, rather than tackling issues that are gender-based violence online. In terms of our foundational research, we've been conducting interviews with young people, as well as literature reviews. And at the moment, what we found is that boys are more likely than girls to request sex. Girls are much more likely to feel pressured into sending nude images of themselves and then later feel regret on having done so. The masculine bravado means that boys are much more likely to brag about than to share any sex that they've received. And sexting, we can find, leaves children very open to child sexual abuse. And importantly, we've held our first group with our user reference group, with young people talking about the early stages of the game development. And they came back with talking to us about how the fact that girls but not boys carry a stigma for sharing sex. So what we can see is culture does matter, and our foundational research has showed that where sexualized image as girls is considered violation of religious and traditional mores, girls tend to be punished more than boys for actually sending such texts. So in terms of the summary of our findings to date on online child sexual abuse, what we now know is that online child sex abuse is much more than looking at images of child sexual abuse. The risks for online CSA come from both adult and perpetrators and peers. It's not just one or the other. Adult perpetrated online child sexual abuse is as serious as contact sexual abuse in terms of both offender motivation and its impacts on the victim. With adolescents, we find that the concept of consent is seen as irrelevant in the online environment, unlike they would see if they were in a face-to-face encounter that was sexually charged. Young people we find may be very savvy about online grooming by adults. However, they don't translate that into their relationships online with their peers, and impulsivity and peer pressure tends to place them at risk from their peers. Younger children and those who experience child abuse more generally, are at most risk for online child sex abuse. What we see is that parents often lack the knowledge to safeguard their children online, and we recognise that more needs to be done to enable the removal of self-generated images of child sexual abuse. And we currently see that law enforcement is unable to keep a pace with the growth of digital evidence in sexual offences generally, and with online child sexual abuse in particular. So in terms of our recommendations for future directions, we need to find ways of stemming impulsive and potentially regretful sexting. We need to extend consent education in schools into online relationships. We should be seeking to extend relationship and sex education to cover pornography, including the harms and legalities of such encounters. We need to explore the needs of parents of children who've been impacted by online child sexual abuse to enable them to better support their children. We need to evaluate the strategies used to prevent the perpetration of online child sexual abuse. So we need to know, do the pop-up warnings on search engines or sting operations actually work? We need to enable the police and criminal justice system agencies to more swiftly process digital evidence. And we need to protect those tasked with processing digital evidence from secondary trauma. So I'm now going to hand over back to Vicky. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Nadia. We can see that undoubtedly proactive solutions are needed which prevent child abuse before it happens. Ni3 is uniquely positioned to deliver a suite of evidence-based interventions and tools, not just for children, but for parents, teachers, and other professionals in acting to prevent online child sexual abuse. We at Ni3 are keen to explore possibilities for collaboration between ourselves and the Tech Coalition, and we've identified that this could take a number of different forms. Tech Coalition members could have access to a multidisciplinary team of gender-based violence experts. There could be the creation of next insights into the scale and nature of child sexual abuse, and also research into the role of specific technologies in enabling child sexual abuse and its impact on children. Further, we could offer support with regards to the translation of research into programs and digital interventions, as well as evaluating interventions. And finally, there could be the opportunity for the uptake and adaptation of our existing Ni3 interventions. For example, for online learning, such as by Outschool. And that's it. Thank you everyone for listening. We've reached the end of our presentation for you today. Please do feel free to get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you.